Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Megaman 4, brought to us by Capcom. The fourth Mega Man for the Game Boy, this one once again features 4 Robot Masters from Mega Man 4 and 4 Robot Masters from Mega Man 5. While keeping a very similar formula to the other Mega Man games for the Game Boy, this one did add a money system to the game in order to purchase items. And even though it is on the Game Boy, Capcom still did a great job of the graphics, the music, and sound to really make this a fun, portable experience for the Blue Bomber. So here we go with Mega Man 4 for the Game Boy. Unlike some of the other Game Boy games, you actually can get a little bit of a story to start off the game. With a really nice intro with some pretty good graphics, we're introduced to the Robot Masters destroying the city after Dr. Wily drops them off. We're also introduced to the Megaman Killer for this game in Blade. The Megaman Killers being a set of robots exclusive to the Game Boy series, making them unique, that were mainly just created to just destroy and hunt down Mega Man. When you start up a new game, you get a little bit of story actually with Dr. Light before you're actually able to select your first level. Dr. Light pretty much introduces you to the money system in the game. You can then select one of 4 Robot Masters to start the game with. And not surprisingly, we're going to be starting with the easiest Robot Master here. We're going to be starting with Toadman. Toadman, who was easily the easiest for Mega Man 4 on the NES, is still the easiest here on the Game Boy. One thing you will instantly notice for those who haven't played the Game Boy games before is that you have a little bit of a more close-up view here due to the limited space of the Game Boy. However, all the graphics and sprites look amazing and really take no hit even though they're on an 8-bit console. There's one thing though you will notice about the gameplay instantly, which is my biggest gripe about the entire game. For some reason, when you actually shoot the Mega Buster, you're actually knocked back a little bit. Trying to give a more realistic look of when you would fire a gun, the knockback, but this is a very weird feeling, and it's the only time in a Mega Man game you end up seeing this, so it takes a lot to get used to actually. And because of it, if you're not used to it, may cause you a couple of extra deaths here and there when trying to get over certain pits or certain areas. Also, in each of the levels in the game, you can collect a letter. For the first 4 Robot Masters, we end up collecting letters that spell beat. When you collect all the letters, you unlock the Friendly Bird Robot Beat to help you along the way. The other 4 set of letters we'll be getting in the second set of Robot Masters are needed in order to enter the final castle of the game. You'll need to find every one of the letters, but thankfully you can always travel back to previous levels in the game, so even if you miss it your first time around, you can go back and grab it. However, Capcom did a pretty good job of just kind of putting them in your way. You don't really have to do a whole lot of extra exploration in order to locate these items, so you shouldn't have too much trouble finding them. The items in the game are pretty standard for Mega Man, with the exception of that you actually have the P capsules, which you've been noticing I've been picking up. These are of course the money system. They didn't use the bolt system that we saw in other Mega Man titles, so this is another little unique thing about this particular Mega Man. Now all the enemies you've pretty much seen if you played the Mega Man 4 for the original NES, including the giant snail boss, that you'll have to fire at his eyes when they're actually open, and avoid the eyes and avoid his attacks as well. After the second snail though, it's time to actually face off with Toadman. Just like Toadman from the NES, he's extremely easy to deal with. Just immediately attack him so you send him into the air by jumping. Every time you attack him, he'll keep jumping over and over again, and you can make sure that he never gets an attack off. If he's able to stand still for a period of time, he will summon rain from the ceiling that will cause you damage. But thankfully, like I said, just keep firing at him, and you can just manipulate him back and forth until all his health is drained. Once he's defeated, we of course get his ability, and we move on to the next Robot Master. We also end up getting the Rush Coil for defeating Toadman. Just like Rush Coil from the other Mega Man titles, Rush appears, we're able to jump on his back, and he springs us up into the air and allow us to get to certain platforms that we normally can't jump to. The second Robot Master we're going to be tangling with is Brightman. Now the unfortunate thing is, some of the Mega Man Game Boy games did kind of change up the stages of some of the Robot Masters. However, they really kind of just made the same stages just on a smaller scale here for the Game Boy, with the same enemies and pretty much the same type of puzzles in order to get through as far as platforming and all that's concerned. Up here you'll have to hit this switch and it'll cause platforms to fall down from the ceiling. When you stand on the platforms, they will start to rise. So you'll have to use this to your advantage in order to keep jumping from platform to platform to get over the gap. At the end, you'll hit the switch again in order to turn back on the lights. On the next area, you'll have these platforms that you'll jump on, and when you're standing on top of them, they're not quite happy, but they end up moving. You can keep jumping on top of them in order to get them to raise. So we're going to jump on this platform to grab some extra items, and then we're going to get this platform in order to travel over to the far right so we can get above the spikes. You can do this, of course, by just going over the platform, but I'll have some fun by going underneath the platform. Just be careful that you don't accidentally hit the spikes by going down too far when you're traveling on the right side. Here we have another one of those spinning guys. You can take him out and actually use the Rush Coil in order to get above, so you can get a big piece of health in case you actually do need it. Here you have more of the rising platforms as well as enemies, and when you have all this on screen, the Game Boy will start to lag a little bit. Be careful though, because of the knockback of the shot, that when you jump, you don't end up getting knocked back by the enemy that you're trying to attack, or hit by his projectile. Even with the screen going pretty slowly, there's going to be a lot of bullets on screen at once sometimes when they fire. In the next area, you'll have platforms that when you jump on top of them, they end up going along the track to the opposite side. Of course, using these, you'll be able to easily jump over to the next platform over. Be sure along this path, though, that you do pick up the E letter, so you have another letter in the series of letters that spell beat. Take out the firework enemy at the end in order to brighten up the skies, and move on to the next screen. Over here, more of the same thing. You'll have the light bulb enemies that when you destroy them will make it dark, but thankfully there's other ones of the firework enemies to help you out. Here we have to ride along another platform that's not quite happy to have us on them, but thankfully that is the end of the level, so now it's time to battle with Brightman. Brightman's main ability is the ability to freeze time, and when he does so, he'll easily get an instant shot on you, so you'll have to be careful. He does fire out normal projectiles, using like 3 shots at a time, that you may be able to jump over if you time it correctly. If he ends up freezing time, though, you're pretty much gonna get hit by one of these. Brightman's weakness is Toadman's ability, so after I drain some of his health, I'll finish him off with Toadman's ability. Once he's taken care of, though, we get his move, and we move on to the next Robot Master. Of course, you end up getting a time-stopping move from Brightman, and you can use this to your advantage to help you out with normal enemies, but also help you against our next Robot Master, which we're going to be heading to Faraman. Faraman is easily my favorite Robot Master from Mega Man 4 on the NES, and once again he's one of my favorite Robot Masters even on the Game Boy. Now the level starts off with, of course, a lot of sinking sand around, and interestingly enough, you actually can slide throughout it. Here, though, you'll have to watch out, though, for the scorpion-like enemies that will come out of the sand and try to run into you head-on. There's also bee enemies that will fly overhead and drop some projectiles down on you, so watch out for those as well. When you drop down to below, you'll be in some more sand, so you have a pretty easy area to navigate here. If you've taken some damage, or you want to pick up an extra bit of P-money, you can use Rush Coil at the end in order to spring up and grab both items. The mummy enemies, one of the more annoying enemies in my opinion from the NES counterpart, is here in the Game Boy version as well. They end up coming out of the wall, and after a few seconds use their wrapping in order to send their head flying towards you. You'll have to wait for them to throw the head out and dodge the head, and keep attacking the body in order to get rid of them. After a second, though, after they fire, they will retreat back into the wall, come back out, and they have a new head ready and willing to fire at you once again. One of the platforming gimmicks for this level is you have these small rock platforms that when you stand on them, a few seconds later they shake and drop down one little level here. You'll of course have to use a few of these, not just here, but also later on in the game, in order to help you navigate through some small areas and pathways. It can be a little bit tricky taking out the mummy guys while also dealing with the quicksand, so just keep jumping up and firing fully charged shots if you can at those mummies to get rid of them. Here what you're going to have to do is use the right rock in order to jump off of it and grab the letter A before the rock falls down. If the letter falls down before you're able to jump up and get the A, you'll probably have to lose a life and try again. It's the toughest of the letters we've grabbed so far, but overall it's not too tricky of a jump as long as you do so quickly. Here we have some more sinking rocks. Stand on the one on the right, and when it gets down below to the same level as the opening, you can do a nice little quick slide to get inside. Once inside, you'll be able to go past one more mummy, and it's time for the boss battle against Faraman. Now, Faraman is probably the toughest Robot Master of the first 4. He moves pretty quickly along the screen, and his jumping can be sometimes tricky in order to dodge because of the giant raised platform in the middle. He bounces all over the place consistently, firing out his projectile at you. Thankfully though, you can use the time stopper to your advantage to freeze him in place and keep firing at him over and over again with just the normal Mega Buster shots. Once he's taken care of though, you grab his ability and we move on to the 4th Robot Master. Getting Faraman's Pharaoh Shot is probably the best move in the game, one of my favorites to use. And if it wasn't for the extra new ability that Blade gives you, it would definitely be the best move in the game. Being able to control a fully charged out blast can help you take out most enemies in the game and really help you out against some of the tougher areas. Ringman's level has some pretty tricky platforming. You have different platforms that you land on that end up disappearing from left to right, or from right to left, depending upon what type of platform they are. Thankfully though, even though there is no color on the Game Boy, they did make the platforms look different from one another, so you can differentiate which one is which. Even with that though, doing so quickly and remembering which is which can be a little bit troublesome. When you land on these platforms, immediately do a slide in the proper direction so you can get off of them quickly. Of course, on some of them though, you'll have to be ready to actually jump over a gap because they're going to be disappearing coming actually towards you. Here you can easily slide underneath, destroy the Saturn-looking robot with a nice little shot, and then climb up the next ladder. Here, be very careful. If you want the extra life, you'll have to do a slide, but immediately turn the opposite direction once you grab the extra life, or you'll end up causing yourself to fall down into the pit. You can use a special ability to take out this guy or just walk through him, but you'll have to climb up this ladder in order to get the letter T, the final of the 4 beat letters that we needed in order to actually get our robot companion beat. You can make this ladder from the right platform, you don't need rush coil, but it can sometimes be a little bit tricky to grab that ladder. Here we have the mini ring boss. Stay on the far left side and try to do your best to avoid the rings when they come flying at you in a nice spread shot pattern, and you'll have to do little jumps and shoot him directly in the eye with a fully charged up blast. After 4 or so of these, he'll be taken care of. Here, if you need some extra health, you can use rush coil to help you up in order to grab a big chunk of health. As soon as you fall down though, get ready to slide so you can avoid landing in spikes. Down the next ladder, you'll have a rematch against the ring boss, and this time he may be able to hit you a little bit easier because it's a little bit smaller of an area, but it's still pretty much the same type of fight. When you drop down below next time though, be ready to jump over the gap that ends up forming when the platform starts moving. Continue climbing up and use fully charged up shots on the cannons on the left wall. Next up, you'll have a pretty much exact duplicate of an area we saw earlier on in the stage, but you have an extra enemy to deal with here. Here, avoid the last little enemy by jumping over it, and then enter the door to battle Ringman. I'll deliver a fully charged up shot with my Mega Buster first with Ringman, and then jump over him as he comes running towards me. Ringman will fire out 2 rings. One directly at you standing on the ground, and then he'll jump up in the air and fire one that way. It's pretty easy though to actually jump over the rings. Now for some extra little fun though, his weakness is Faraman's ability, so after I've drained about half his health, I'll bust out the Pharaoh shot, do a full charged up shot with that, and instantly get rid of Ringman. Once he's taken care of though, we move on to another level before we end up moving on to the second set of Robot Masters. After a pretty cool, nice graphical introduction to Wily's big giant tank here, we then have the battle with a giant satellite dish. Charge up your Mega Buster, and after a few seconds, he'll send this giant ball out towards you. It'll move in a pretty easy pattern that you'll be able to jump over. He'll then continue moving the satellite down. Once it's down at the bottom, it will open up finally, allowing you to fire at it a couple of times. He'll then send out a circling type shot at you, which you'll have to get underneath of or jump over in order to avoid getting hit by it, but since it moves in a pretty big circle, it's not too bad to dodge. He'll then usually repeat the process by sending out the ball at you once again, and then this time he'll usually raise up into the air, allowing you to try to shoot him by jumping up high into the sky in order to actually do damage. After a little bit of the battle though, he will send out 2 of those circling shots at once. Thankfully though, with a nice charged up shot, if you time it correctly, you actually can destroy them. Or you can just walk through them and it does a little bit of damage, but since the other moves are pretty easy to dodge, you should have plenty of health. Once the satellite dish is destroyed though, we move on to the second half of this level. Once you drop down into a little bit of a pit, you'll then be in another whole room filled up with giant missiles. You'll have to fire at these missiles with a nice little Mega Buster shot in order to get rid of them, so you can actually walk over the area that they're at. It's a little bit of a pain, but there's only a few of them to get through before you make it to another Wily door. Once you enter inside here, though, you have a nice little cutscene with Dr. Wily. Chase Wily down after a few seconds, and it's time to battle Blade, the Megaman Killer. Now, Blade is really coolly designed, but he actually ends up being a pretty easy fight here, at least to start off. He does nice little short jumps, and this will give you plenty of opportunity to deliver many charged up shots at him as he's jumping around the room. His projectile that he ends up sending out at you, and a pretty easy to dodge spread shot. Thankfully though, you'll be able to get a ton of hits in on him because he moves rather slowly. Once he's taken care of and down to 1 health, he ends up teleporting out. Once he's taken care of though, we get back to the Robot Master selection screen, and now we have 4 new Robot Masters to deal with. These 4 Robot Masters are of course from Mega Man 5 for the NES. Now we're going to start this set of 4 off with Charge Man, the train-themed Robot Master. One of my favorite enemies in this game is the one you see right away at the beginning of this level, and that is the Met driving a little movable train. The Mets are always one of the more interesting enemies in all of Mega Man, and they always have nicely cute or cool designs, and that definitely is no exception with the train one that we saw on the NES and here on the Game Boy. On top of the train, you have a pretty fast-moving background, but thankfully the train's not moving itself for you, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. There's a lot of flying enemies during this segment, but be careful by either going underneath of them or just fire at a couple of them with just normal Mega Buster shots in order to get rid of them. Here you can also slide underneath or use an ability to destroy the rocks so that you actually can get underneath of it here in order to grab some extra items. Keep using fully charged up shots to take out the large robots, and when you make it to the next screen, you'll have to do a pretty high up jump in order to keep firing at the large rooster robot on the right platform. There's some more of the large robots. Be careful of the one on the left that even if you try to just pass him by going to the right, he'll probably get one shot at you with his giant ball. Here on the next screen, you'll see a leather Y hanging up in the upper left corner. You'll have to use the rush coil in order to grab it. This is the first letter of the second set of letters we need to collect. Now this set ends up spelling out Wily, but you do need to collect these letters in order to actually enter the final dungeon of the game. After dropping down one more little open area, we finally make it to the Dr. Wily boss door, and it's time to battle with Charge Man. Charge Man can be a little bit difficult because he actually is one of the larger robot masters, so he can be tricky to jump over. He'll move back and forth a little bit, and every so often stop in order to do a full charge at you, which you can easily jump over, thankfully, because the added speed actually helps you out. He'll also sometimes stop and fire rocks up into the sky. When they come raining down on you, you'll have to dodge in between them in order to avoid getting hit. While Charge Man may not be the easiest robot master in the game, it's a pretty easy fight. Just hitting him with fully charged up shots, you should have no issue. Once he's taken care of course, we grab his move and move on to the next master. For defeating Charge Man, we not only get his ability, but we also get the Rust Jet, which will be helping us out in a few areas in the game. Next up, we move on to probably my favorite Robot Master from Mega Man 5 on the NES, and that is Napalm Man. Now Napalm Man, I must say, has a completely different designed level than his NES counterpart. There's no real similarities here between the two. Now enemies are pretty much the same, but the overall design of the level isn't. There's also a couple of little extra pathways you can take throughout this level to travel through, but they aren't too different, and they all of course are leading to the same eventual goal. When you make it over here, you'll actually have to wait for this giant rotating spike to actually come down from the ceiling. Once it comes down to a certain spot, it will stop and then start drilling across to the right. You'll be able to ride across it in order to get over the giant gap as well as the flames. Taking the upper path here will net you one of the giant P capsules, so that'll give you some extra money. Then you'll have to wait a few seconds for another one of those drills to come out from this small little gap here. You won't be able to make the jump over, so wait for it to start rising up, and then you'll be able to jump on it in order to get across a little bit of a gap. Here we're introduced to another one of the tools in the game. This one will fire out a giant shot from its cannon. And like all tools, you'll have to wait for him to give you a nice little opening before you're able to hit him with a shot. In the next area, you'll have these giant rockets that'll be introduced to you. The missiles do take up a large amount of space on screen. After coming out of the ground, they will stop after a few seconds, so be careful and wait for them to stop and retract back down to the ground below before you attempt to make it over the pit they're in. There's also the other giant missiles that try to attack you. Now, they only take like one shot with a Mega Buster to get rid of, but if they get too far away from you, they end up exploding, causing shrapnel to fly everywhere. Now here, you'll notice the next Wily leather. In order to actually get it, we're going to use the Rush Coil here on the right in order to spring upwards and jump to the platform it's on. Or you can, of course, use the flames below in order to actually jump on them, and you won't be instantly killed, thankfully, here. Either way, jump over, grab the leather, and move on back down to the next pit. During this area, you'll have to move along quickly as the ground that you're standing on will start to break apart. There is a couple of the giant missiles, so you'll have to avoid them, and jump on the giant drill on the far right in order to make it over the final little gap. When you make it over here, there's another one of the giant drills that will come down from the ceiling. This one will actually start to destroy the wall over to the right. After it's destroyed all the rocks, usually I grab Rush Coil in order to spring myself up so I can actually make it through that little hallway. At the end of the hallway though, it's time to battle with Napalm Man. Napalm Man, like I said before, is my favorite from Mega Man 5. He has two main attacks. He has normal straight missiles, which are pretty easy just to jump in between. The more deadly move he has is his giant bombs that he throws out that when they hit the ground cause a pretty big explosion. The bombs themselves are rather large and take up a decent amount of space, and with the added explosion, they take up probably at least a quarter of the screen overall on the ground. Now, Napalm Man's weakness is Charge Man's ability, and it's the weirdest move in the game. Just like with Mega Man 5, you'll actually have to do the slide while having it activated in order to actually use the move. Once Napalm Man is done though, we have only 2 more Robot Masters to go. Next up is the rock-themed Robot Master in Stone Man. Here he has some Matools that when you end up attacking them, they end up breaking up into smaller little Matools. This can be a little bit annoying when you hit them, and usually I like to just shoot one and just walk through the rest of them, and just avoid them altogether. After dropping down, we have a giant hippo on a platform. It can be rather annoying to hit, and the best way for me to get rid of him is by using the Pharaoh shot, because you can do a full charged up shot and launch it directly at him in the upper right corner. After hitting him with 3 fully charged up ones, you instantly get rid of him without having to destroy all the rocks of the platform that he's standing on. In case you lost some health during the Hippo fight, you can stand on this rock and then drop down to the left side in order to grab a big health piece. After climbing up a ladder, we have a rematch against the Hippo, and once again we'll be using the Pharaoh shot in order to hit it on the raised platform above. Once again, thankfully, just 3 shots to get rid of it, and even though it drained almost all of our Pharaoh shot, really not that big a deal, as we'll be able to either get more item or get it replenished later on. In the next little area, you'll have a couple of screens of some of the fast-moving mine enemies. Just move faster than them, or hit them with a full charged-up shot in order to get rid of them before they even start attacking you. These platforms are a little bit tricky. When you stand on one side of them, the weight ends up shifting and they end up going to the opposite side. When you drop down here, be sure to hold right so you can get into this little opening so you can grab the letter L, the next to the Wily letters. Right past that, though, it's time to actually battle the boss, Stone Man. Stone Man can be a pain because you can't attack him all the time. When he ends up doing a big jump at you, he ends up falling apart on the ground and then will reform a few seconds later. When he does this, you'll have to wait for him to reform in order to actually get a shot in on him. He'll send some rotating rocks around the room that are pretty easy as long as you're not standing directly next to him, because you should be able to get into the big opening they end up creating. And even though you can't attack him all the time, fully charged up shots drain his health rather fast. You'll be able to get rid of Stone Man and move on to the final Robot Master of the game. And next up is Crystalman. When climbing up this ladder, you'll see one of the crystal creating enemies on the left side. You'll see quite a few of these throughout the level. After a few seconds, they'll actually form a big crystal to send at you, and you'll have to wait for that crystal to get out of the way before you're able to do damage to him. The first part of the level, though, is pretty easy to just navigate through. There is a few spikes along the ground, but overall the enemies are pretty easy to contend with. When you drop down here, either destroy the enemy or just run through him. You'll be in a very small room. Jump up straight up into the air so you can grab the letter W, the final of the Wily letters we need to collect. This is the hardest one to locate in the game, so be careful when you drop down that first platform that you go right so you can make it into that very small room. Thankfully, if you climbed up this ladder here, you would notice it to the left in case you accidentally missed it. You can climb here to the upper right in order to grab another one of those giant pea capsules, and then ride the rock down so you can make it over to the small opening on the right. Just make sure it falls down far enough so that when you jump up, you'll be able to make it across the little gap. Here you'll have two paths to take. I'm going to take the bottom one here, jumping on top of this platform, taking out this guy, before jumping over to the left and taking another ladder. When you drop down here past this guy, you'll end up running into Eddie, or Flip Top. Of course, like all the other games, if you end up meeting up with him, he ends up giving you an item. It may be a small item, a big item, or even an extra life, but it's always kind of randomized. In this room, we're going to use the Rush Jet for the first time in order to help us get over this gap. These guys are pretty fun. You actually have to shoot them, and when you do, it causes them to fly outwards. Then, while they're retracting, you can jump on them in order to get over certain areas. Here you have different columns that will either start to rise or lower from the ceiling. What you'll have to do is you have to wait a few seconds for the one to lower, and then you'll see just to the right another one will start raising up slowly. You can use the Rush Jet to help you out a little bit to avoid some of the pillars. Here, just hug the right area so you can make it to the lower platform, take out the last enemy, and enter the room in order to face off with Crystalman. Crystalman is the toughest of the 4 robot masters in the second half of the game. The reason for this is the amount of projectiles he shoots out at once. He has 4 crystals that bounce all along the room. Now, these can be a little bit tricky to dodge in and out of. You can slide underneath of them, jump over them, but also the game slows down pretty heavily with that amount of projectiles on screen at once. He also fires out a normal straight shot that'll come directly towards you, which that's easily dodgeable while he's jumping around the room. Now his weakness ends up being Steam Man's ability, which unfortunately I forgot here and ended up trying out a few of the other moves instead, but no big deal, I'm still able to take him out with any of the Robot Master abilities. After completing the 4 areas, we then make it to one more Wily area. As you can see by having all the letters that spell out Wily, all these doors end up opening up and you can enter inside. The next room you can grab a giant E-tank as well as a big item replenishment if you do need it. This is a good way to replenish some of the item you may have used, as well as you can also grab a giant P capsule in the upper left corner. After a pretty small area, just be sure not to fall down the little pit, you'll then enter the actual boss chamber to do a rematch against Blade. He will change up his form a little bit, and he's definitely tougher this time around. We're going to be using still the Mega Buster with a fully charged up shots in order to do damage to him. His main move though is he has these big bombs that he ends up dropping along the ground. They sit there for a few seconds being in your way, but they also explode, covering a little bit of the ground area, so they can be tricky in order to dodge. Blade himself moves rather quickly and can sometimes be tricky to navigate sliding underneath of him. Just keep hitting him with those fully charged up shots and you will actually destroy Blade this time around. For destroying him, you also get his move, which is going to be crucial to get through the next area. The area you end up landing in starts to self-destruct. All the ground below you and to the left of you will start to disappear, and you'll have to quickly get through all these bombs like we did earlier on in the game in order to continue. Unfortunately, unlike last time, you'll have to do so quickly because of course the ground will give way and you'll end up losing a life. You also have to be careful because they like to place some of these bombs over pits themselves, so you'll have to hit the correct bombs in order to continue on. You can use the Mega Buster to help you out at first. When you get to more tricky areas, you can use the Pharaoh Shot or Blade's move because you can actually control the pattern they end up going in order to destroy more and more of the bombs. For example, here if you end up running out of the Pharaoh Shot, be sure to switch right over to Blade's Cracker move in order to actually help you out. Since you can shoot this in any direction, and if timed correctly, the explosion from it can actually destroy other nearby bombs. But just like before, you'll have to be careful that when you destroy nearby bombs, it doesn't destroy one over a pit. After a little bit, you'll escape the area and move on to the final area of the game, but we will make one quick stop first. Since this is our final opportunity, we're going to be using the shop just for the first time really here. You can see the different items that you're able to pick up. The best one is the S-Tanks. These of course fully replenish not only your health, but they also fully replenish all your weapons. Now we won't actually need it, but it's easily the best item to actually grab in the game. The only other item that you may want to pick up is the Auto Charger. This actually, when you pick up any of the weapon replenishments, will instantly go to the lowest weapon that you currently have. So that can really help out as far as just grabbing extra little weapon supplies here and there, but overall we won't actually need it. It's now time for the final area of the game, Wily's giant space station here. Starts off with giant missiles coming towards you. Just use your slide ability and you'll be able to actually slide underneath all the missiles coming directly towards you. When the screen shifts over, you'll have a giant Matul controlling a giant gun. Stand close to the Matul when he ends up doing the giant shot and you'll be able to avoid any damage potentially from that charged up blast. Just keep doing jumps as high as you possibly can in order to deliver hits to the Matul when it's opened up, and when he's low enough to the ground so you actually can do damage. Continue along the next area, watching out for the giant drill enemy that will try to come down on you. Thankfully, sliding underneath of them and just keep moving, you'll be able to not even have to fight him. The next giant Matul, though, is the other strategy you can use against these guys, and just jump on the cannon itself and keep blasting them directly in the face. I want to at least show, though, there's two different ways to take out the Matuls. Next up, you'll have some more missiles, as well as a giant health replenishment at the end of the area before you actually face off with the boss itself. For this boss, you'll have to fire at it when it actually has its gun closed in, when it's the white orb. Do a fully charged up shot to the orb and then avoid the straight projectile it ends up firing out. The projectiles it shoots out are the different Robot Master abilities, including Ringman and Napalm Man. He also has a giant claw that he uses. When he uses the claw, be sure to either quickly slide underneath of it when it's coming towards you, so you can avoid accidentally getting grabbed by it. Keep delivering those fully charged up shots and you'll drain its health quickly and move on to the second level of Wily's area. The next area begins with those giant friendly missiles that come out of the ground. Just like before, you'll have to wait for them to retract back down so you can make it over the gaps. Watch out for the crystal guy at the end of this platform and then climb up a nearby ladder. Of course, being the Wily stage, they're throwing pretty much everything they can at you, including all the enemies from previous levels. Here we're going to switch over to the rush jet so we can make it over the gap with all the giant spikes below us. Here we're going to land so that we can take out this guy before using the rush jet once again in order to get over more spikes. You can take out this guy on the right and grab some extra item replenishments in the upper right corner if you want before dropping down the hole. This ends up working well, especially considering you're gonna need the Pharaoh shot, so it can definitely help you out. That's also why we picked up that S-Tank in case we do need it, but thankfully they give you a decent amount of item replenishments to help you throughout this area. When you drop down to the area below, once again wait for the crystal guy to fire out so you can actually take him out before moving to his platform. Before making this jump, another one of those big missiles will come out, so just be on your toes and ready for any of the missiles to pop out at any time. After a couple of the missiles and a couple more pits, you make it to another Wily boss door. This is the first of the eyeball bosses. This eyeball boss will actually cause a whole bunch of little ones to start flying around the room and you'll have to destroy all of them. There's only one that you can actually hurt in order to do damage, and once you've actually destroyed the other ones, he ends up causing more to spawn. So, you really only need to focus on the main one, but the other ones will get in the way and the game will slow down with all of them on screen. It moves in a pretty easy pattern, and also the room being big enough should allow you plenty of space to avoid taking damage from him. Once he's done, we move on to another area of the same stage, and more missiles end up meeting us along the way. When you make it up here, take out the enemy and pull out the rush jet just like before so you can make it over all the spikes. The screen will slow down pretty massively if rush jet is on the same screen as one of the enemies, so that does get a little bit annoying, and probably one of the only negatives about the game. In order to make it over here, you'll have to use the rush coil to help you out. After one of these friendly mummy enemies, you'll make it to another one of the Wily boss doors. This time it's another one of the eye enemies, but this one works differently than the one we faced off with before. What happens is you have two of them that move along the floor and ceiling of the level. Every so often, one of them will close and the other one opens up. The only one open is the one you can actually damage. After they travel for a bit, the whole ground and area that you're standing in will change up. Just keep blasting them as much as possible and try to get rid of them quickly, because you can get a decent amount of damage done to you with the ground constantly changing on you. After he's taken care of, we have a tiger and some of the giant missiles meeting us along the way for the next little area. You don't have much though before you end up making it to one of Wily's capsules. Once you enter the capsule, you'll be in a room filled with all the other capsules. And similar to almost every other Mega Man game that's ever come out, it's time for rematches against all the robot masters of the game. Now, unlike before, I'm just going to be using mainly their weaknesses in order to help me out and get rid of them. Here we end up using Brightman's ability on Faraman in order to keep him frozen in the air, stopping Faraman from really able to even get his projectile off or even land on the ground sometimes. Next up is Toadman, and while you could use Toadman's weakness, it actually is just as easy just to keep firing the Mega Buster and get him stuck in a loop, just like we did before. The half charged up shots is all you really need in order to keep blasting Toadman over and over again to get rid of him. Our third Robot Master rematch is against Brightman, and we're going to be using Toadman's ability to help us out. Fire out that rain capsule up into the sky to cause the rain to come down on Brightman in order to do a ton of damage to him. It'll take 3 or 4 of Toadman's ability in order to get rid of Brightman once and for all. Next up is our rematch against Ringman, and we're going to be using Faraman's ability in order to hit him. Thankfully, it only takes a couple of shots with Faraman's move in order to instantly drain all of Ringman's health. Crystalman is next, and like I said before, his weakness is Chargeman's ability. So wait for Crystalman to land, switch to Chargeman's move, and keep doing the slide over and over again to drain most of Crystalman's health pretty fast. Next up is Chargeman, so get out Stoneman's ability in order to easily drain his health, watching out for the flaming rocks he shoots up in the air, and just avoid him walking back and forth into you over and over again. Unfortunately, you can't hit Chargeman while he's actually doing one of his powerful moves, so it is a little bit annoying. Next up is Napalm Man, and this time we actually have Crystalman's move against Napalm Man to help us out. You can either fire Crystalman's move directly at him for the big crystal, or against the wall so that it breaks apart into the small ones that bounce around the room and hit Napalm Man that way. Last but not least, it's time for Stone Man. Here we'll switch over to Napalm Man's in order to hit Stone Man. Of course, when he's only formed fully can you actually do damage to him, but the explosion from Napalm Man's move will destroy him pretty easily. Once Stone Man's done, we grab our last big piece of extra health, and now it's time for the final boss of the game. Thankfully, they give you plenty of big item replenishments before the boss, so be sure to equip Faraman's move to fill that up, also fill up Stone Man's move, and in case you need to, Blade Cracker. After replenishing your items, it's time to battle Dr. Wily. After a really awesome intro for the boss, it's now time to actually get down to business. Equip Crystalman's move and wait a few seconds, dodging the first projectile he fires out. Then jump on the large arms that come out of the right and left walls. By using these, you'll be able to actually jump high enough to directly hit the center core. When the hands come crashing down though, you'll have to avoid getting squashed by them, and as well as they will sometimes actually punch straight out at you. So just don't stand too close to any of the walls, and you shouldn't have too much trouble being able to drain the health of this first form. Dr. Wily's robot will lower down, and it's time for the second fight. Here you'll have to use Blade's Cracker. In order to actually hit him, you'll have to fire directly into the giant robot's mouth when it's trying to pull you towards him. After he tries to pull you towards him for a few seconds, he ends up stopping and fires a whole bunch of projectiles from his antenna. Dodge in and out of all the projectiles, and then when he gets done with that, he'll charge directly towards you. In order to actually avoid getting squashed by the giant robot, you'll have to keep firing out at him, usually using the normal Mega Buster in order to keep repeatedly hitting him over and over again to keep him away from you long enough so he gives up and retracts. Once he does so though, equip the Blade Cracker once again and keep firing directly into the mouth of the giant robot. And just like most Mega Man games, you get to face off with Dr. Wily and his little UFO for the final fight of the game. Just like the previous boss, we're going to be using Blade's Cracker in order to help us out. Here you can actually fire directly at him because you can fire in all directions with the move in order to damage Dr. Wily's spaceship above you. This is the only way to really do damage to Dr. Wily because he never comes low enough on the ground to actually hurt you. He consistently keeps firing out projectiles that end up causing the ground to explode around you, so you'll have to be very careful to avoid any of the pits that he ends up forming. Thankfully, usually after forming 2 pits though, he will move over off screen to the right, causing more ground to actually appear so you'll be safe again. He also fires out these little bouncing balls that can get in your way as well. Slide underneath of them if possible to avoid damage from them. Thankfully, Blade's move has a ton of item ability, so you should have plenty of it in order to actually destroy Dr. Wily. Once he's done, you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Mega Man 4 on the Game Boy. So after a pretty cool ending, seeing Blade actually turn good in the end, we then go to an actual showdown of all the robot masters from the game with little demos showing each boss fight. Being the fourth Game Boy game for Mega Man, and with all the NES games already released, Mega Man the Many may have started to get stale at this point in time. Also considering the games always used the same robot masters as the NES counterpart with just a little added addition here and there, also made the Game Boy games a little boring to some. But because the graphics were so well done, as well as the gameplay was fun, that Mega Man on the Game Boy is still fun to play no matter what way you look at it. This would also be the final of the Game Boy games that would include old robot masters strictly. Of course, with the release of Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy, they introduced a whole new set of robot masters, making Mega Man 5 one of the more unique and better games on the Game Boy. My only real negative thing about Mega Man 4, though, is the knockback you have when you do a fully charged up shot. I don't know why they decided to add that, other than maybe adding a little bit of realism to the whole gameplay, but it ends up just getting in the way and ends up being more of a nuisance than anything else. After seeing all the demos of all the Robot Masters, we get our thank you for playing with Megaman staring up into the sky as a nice little shooting star goes across the screen to end things. And with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.